The person who pulls away right when things get good, they might actually be falling for you. And that's the most confusing thing about an avoidant who likes you, because everything they do looks like rejection. But it isn't. Comment the word avoidant if you've ever felt confused by someone who seemed to disappear the moment things got real. Now let's get into it. You meet someone. Things feel amazing. There's chemistry, there's connection, there's this electricity between you two that you haven't felt in years, maybe ever. And then something shifts. They pull back, they go quiet, they act like you suddenly don't matter, and you're sitting there wondering what you did wrong. You're replaying every conversation, every text, every moment, trying to find the thing that broke it. But here's what nobody tells you. You didn't break anything. What happened is actually the opposite of what you think. That person didn't pull away because they stopped feeling something. They pulled away because they started feeling too much. And for an avoidant, feeling too much is the most terrifying thing in the world. So today we're going to go deep. We're going to talk about the weird, confusing, sometimes maddening things that avoidants do specifically when they actually like you. Not when they're indifferent. Not when they're just being polite. When they genuinely feel something real for you. Because those are two completely different experiences, and most people have no idea how to tell the difference. Let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about what an avoidant attachment style even is, because you can't understand the behavior without understanding the foundation. Attachment styles are essentially the emotional blueprints we develop in childhood. They're formed by how our caregivers responded to our needs. When we were little and we cried, when we were scared, when we needed comfort, what happened? If someone showed up consistently, we developed what's called a secure attachment. We learned that people could be trusted. We learned that love was safe. We learned that getting close to someone didn't mean we were going to get hurt. But for the avoidant, that's not what happened. For the avoidant, when they reached out for connection, something went wrong. Either the caregiver was emotionally unavailable, or they were dismissive, or they were inconsistent in ways that were deeply confusing to a small child. And so the child learned something very specific. They learned that needing people is dangerous. They learned that vulnerability leads to pain. They learned that the only way to stay safe is to not need anyone, to handle everything yourself, to build walls that nobody can get through, and they got very good at it. So good that most avoidants don't even realize they're doing it. It's not a conscious strategy. It's a survival mechanism that got baked into their nervous system before they were old enough to understand what was happening. And now, decades later, that same mechanism activates every time they start to feel something real for another person. Here's the core thing you need to understand about an avoidant. Their deepest fear is not being alone. Their deepest fear is being engulfed, being consumed, losing themselves inside a relationship. They have this terror of being trapped, of becoming too dependent on someone, of needing someone so much that that person then has the power to destroy them. And so their nervous system is always scanning, always watching for signs of threat. And the most threatening thing, the thing that triggers the deepest alarm, is intimacy itself. Think about that for a second. The very thing that most people seek in a relationship is the thing that sends an avoidant into a kind of internal panic. So when they start to like you, when they start to feel that pull towards you, their system doesn't respond the way yours does. You feel the connection and you want to move toward it. They feel the connection and some part of them wants to run from it. Not because they don't want it, because they want it too much and that want feels terrifying. Now let's get into the actual behaviors, because this is where it gets fascinating and also where it gets really painful for the people who care about them. The first weird thing an avoidant does when they like you is they get closer and then they vanish, not metaphorically, literally. You'll have an amazing week together, deep conversations, genuine connection, moments where you feel like this person really sees you, and then they just disappear. They don't call. They take forever to text back. They seem suddenly distant and cold. And you're left feeling like you imagined the whole thing. What's happening here is something called the push-pull dynamic. The avoidant feels the intimacy growing, and it activates their fear response. So they create distance to regulate their nervous system. It's not personal. It's not about you. It's about the fact that closeness itself feels unsafe to them on a neurological level. The moment they feel themselves getting too close, too vulnerable, too emotionally invested, the alarm goes off, and they do what they've always done. They create space. The cruel irony is that this often happens right after the most genuine, connected moments. The conversation where they opened up in a way they never do. The night where everything felt real and warm and perfect. Those moments are exactly the ones that trigger the retreat, because those are the moments when their walls came down, and coming down feels dangerous. So the walls go back up, fast and hard, and here's what makes this so confusing for you. You don't know that the retreat is a response to closeness. You think it's a response to you. You think you did something wrong. You think they changed their mind. You think they decided you weren't worth it. So you either pull back yourself out of hurt and pride, or you start to chase. And if you chase, you're actually feeding into the dynamic in a way that makes things worse for both of you, but we'll get to that. The second weird thing is the hot and cold communication. This one drives people absolutely crazy. One day they're texting you all morning, engaged, funny, attentive. The next day you send a message and it takes 12 hours to get a response. Or you get something so brief and flat that you barely recognize the person who was just so warm with you yesterday. And you start to wonder, is this person interested? Are they playing games? Are they just busy? What is happening? Here's what's happening. The avoidance nervous system is regulating itself through communication. When they feel safe, when their anxiety is low, when they haven't felt too exposed recently, they can engage warmly and openly. But when they feel like things are getting too intense, when they sense that you might be getting emotionally invested in a way that creates pressure, they pull back in communication as a way of creating distance without having to actually physically leave. Text messages are particularly interesting with avoidance because texts don't require immediate emotional presence. An avoidant can engage warmly over text because there's a built-in buffer. There's no vulnerability of tone of voice, no eye contact, no body language. But even that buffer has limits. When the emotional stakes get high enough, even texting feels threatening. So they go quiet, and the silence is incredibly loud to the person waiting on the other end. What's important to understand is that the inconsistency is not intentional manipulation. They're not sitting there thinking, I'll send a warm message Monday and then ignore them Wednesday to keep them hooked. They're not that calculated. What's actually happening is that their level of engagement fluctuates with their anxiety level. When the anxiety is low, connection feels possible. When the anxiety spikes, connection feels dangerous, and their behavior follows their internal state in real time. The third weird thing is that they will test you without telling you they're testing you. This is one of the more unconscious things avoidants do, and it's one of the most confusing to be on the receiving end of. They'll create situations where you could potentially hurt them, and they'll watch what you do. They'll make an offhand comment that's actually deeply meaningful to them, just to see if you notice. They'll cancel plans to see if you push back or let it go. They'll go quiet to see if you reach out. They'll bring up something vulnerable in a really indirect way to see if you take it seriously or brush it past. They're not doing this to mess with your head. They're doing it because their past has taught them that people can't be trusted with their real selves. So before they let you in any further, before they allow themselves to feel any more for you, they need some kind of evidence. They need data that suggests you might actually be safe, that you won't disappear, that you won't dismiss them, that you won't use their vulnerability against them later. The tragedy is that they don't communicate these tests. They don't say, hey, I need some reassurance here. They set up the situation in this indirect way and then interpret your response through their own lens of expectation. And because they're already expecting to be disappointed because their nervous system is primed for rejection, they often misread perfectly fine responses as confirmation of their fears. You passed the test and they still scored it as a failure because they were looking for reasons to retreat. The fourth weird thing is something I call the intimacy ceiling. An avoidant who likes you will let you get close. They will. They'll have those deep conversations. They'll open up in moments. They'll show you sides of themselves that most people never see. But there will be a point, an invisible line, and when you approach that line, they stop. They might not even consciously know the line is there, but you'll feel it. Suddenly, the conversation that was going so deep just shifts. They change the subject. They make a joke. They get busy. Something about them closes. What you're hitting is the maximum intimacy they currently feel capable of tolerating without their fear response taking over completely. It's not that they don't want to go deeper. On some level, they desperately do. But every inch past a certain point feels like a threat to their sense of self and safety. So they have developed, again, largely unconsciously, these mechanisms for keeping the depth of connection within a range they can manage. This ceiling is incredibly frustrating if you're someone with a secure or anxious attachment because you can feel the potential. You can feel the depth that's possible between you two. You can feel how close you've come. And then the door closes quietly but firmly every time. And you're left standing on the other side wondering why you can never quite get all the way in. The fifth weird thing is that avoidants will often express their feelings for you sideways. Not directly. Not the way you want to hear it. Not in the words that would actually reassure you. They'll do things. They'll show up. They'll remember the random thing you mentioned 3 weeks ago and bring you exactly that. They'll do a favor for you that required real effort without making a big deal out of it. They'll sit with you when you're sad without knowing what to say but refusing to leave. They'll make playlists. They'll send you articles. They'll fix things in your apartment. They'll do all of these things that are actually deeply significant expressions of feeling, and they will almost never attach the words to them. This is the acts of service love language taken to an extreme, and it comes from the avoidant's deep discomfort with verbal vulnerability. Saying I like you, saying I care about you, saying you matter to me. Those sentences require emotional exposure that feels genuinely threatening to someone with avoidant attachment. Because if you say it out loud and the other person responds badly, or uses it to pull you in deeper than you're ready to go, or then has power over you because they know how you feel, that's terrifying. But doing something, that has a level of deniability. They can do thoughtful things, and if challenged, they can always frame it as just being nice. The sixth weird thing is the way an avoidant handles vulnerability when it happens. And it does happen even with avoidance, because humans are fundamentally built for connection, and that drive doesn't disappear just because you have walls. There will be moments, usually late at night, usually when their guard is down, usually when something has cracked them open, when an avoidant will share something real, something deep, something they almost never share with anyone. And here's what happens after. The shame spiral. They wake up the next day and they feel deeply exposed. They feel like they made a mistake. They feel embarrassed and vulnerable and unsafe. And the way they handle that shame is by creating distance from the person they opened up to. Because that person now holds something real about them, and that feels dangerous. So they pull back, sometimes dramatically. They might become colder, more formal, less available, and you're sitting there confused because you thought that moment of connection meant things were getting closer. But for them, that moment of connection was followed by a wave of anxiety that required immediate regulation, and the regulation looks like pulling away from you. This pattern, the vulnerable moment followed by this retreat, is one of the hallmarks of avoidant attachment in someone who genuinely likes you. If they didn't care about you, there would be no vulnerability in the first place. The fact that they opened up is actually the evidence of the feeling. The retreat is the fear responding to it. The seventh weird thing is that avoidants often sabotage things right when they're going well. This one is heartbreaking to witness, and even more heartbreaking to be on the receiving end of. Everything is going great. You're building something real. The connection is deepening. And then they do something, say something, pull back in a way that threatens the whole thing. They start a fight over nothing. They become suddenly critical. They get weirdly cold right after a warm stretch. They bring up doubts about the relationship that came from nowhere. What's happening here is that the closeness has reached a level that their nervous system reads as genuinely dangerous. And so it does what it was programmed to do. It creates a reason to create distance. The sabotage is often unconscious. They're not sitting there thinking things are going too well. I need to blow this up. What's happening is more automatic than that. The anxiety builds until it has to go somewhere, and it goes into the relationship. It goes into their behavior towards you. This is one of the most painful experiences for a secure or anxious partner because it creates this pattern where you feel like you're always taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. The progress is real, but it's always interrupted. And after a while, you start to wonder if the progress is even worth it, if you'll always be reset before you get to the good thing you can almost see. The eighth weird thing is the fantasy relationship. Avoidants are often extremely romantic in their heads. They will build a whole inner world around someone they care about. They think about you constantly. They imagine scenarios. They feel the connection deeply in private, in their own interior life. But they struggle enormously to bring that inner life out into the real relationship. There's this gap between how much they feel and how much they express. And you, the person on the other side, only see the expression. You don't see the feeling. So you think there's less feeling than there actually is. This is why avoidants are sometimes described as loving from a distance. The love is real. The feeling is genuine. But the emotional expression of it gets stuck somewhere between the interior experience and the actual interaction. They've spent so many years not expressing emotional needs, not asking for closeness, not showing vulnerability, that those muscles are genuinely underdeveloped, not because they don't feel, because they were never allowed to practice feeling out loud. The ninth weird thing is how avoidants handle conflict when they like you. For most people, conflict in a relationship they care about creates anxiety that motivates resolution. You want to work it out because you want to preserve the connection. But for an avoidant, conflict does something different. It activates their attachment system and their fear system simultaneously. They feel the pull to resolve it and the terror of the vulnerability that resolution would require. So they often do one of two things. They either shut down completely and go silent, which feels like stonewalling, or they get out and stay out. They leave the conflict unresolved rather than go through the exposure of working it through emotionally. This doesn't mean they don't care about the conflict. It means the emotional cost of processing the conflict feels higher than they can currently manage. Avoidants who like you will often circle back after some time has passed. They'll bring up the conflict again when their nervous system has calmed down, or they'll make a gesture toward resolution without ever fully processing what happened, which again leaves you feeling unheard and confused. But here's what's important. An avoidant who truly doesn't care about you will not circle back. They'll let the conflict be the ending. The fact that they do come back, even imperfectly, even without all the words, is actually meaningful. It means you matter to them. It means they're trying in the limited way they currently can. The 10th weird thing is the mixed signals around exclusivity and commitment. An avoidant who likes you will want you around. They'll want to see you. They'll want the warmth of your presence. But when it comes to formalizing things, when it comes to actually naming what you are or making commitments about the future, they'll get vague and uncomfortable. Not because they don't want you, because naming it makes it real. And real means vulnerable. And vulnerable means they could lose something. There's a phrase that captures this perfectly. They want the relationship without the label. The label creates a kind of emotional contract, and emotional contracts are terrifying to an avoidant because they create obligation and the possibility of a very specific, named kind of loss. As long as it's undefined, it's somehow safer. The stakes feel lower, even though the feelings are just as real, and this creates enormous frustration and confusion for the person they're with. Because from your perspective, the label would just be acknowledging what's already true. It doesn't change the reality of the relationship. It just names it. But for them, naming it changes everything. It makes the thing they've been trying not to fully feel suddenly undeniable. And undeniable is scary when your whole system is built around denial. Now I want to take a moment and talk about something that doesn't get said enough in conversations about avoidant attachment, and that is the difference between understanding and excusing. Understanding why an avoidant behaves the way they do doesn't mean the behavior is acceptable. It doesn't mean you should tolerate things that are genuinely hurting you. Understanding is a tool for clarity. It's a way of not taking personally what isn't personal. It's a way of seeing the situation accurately so you can make genuinely informed choices. Because here's the thing. The question isn't just, does this avoidant like me? The question is this relationship giving you what you actually need? And that's a question only you can answer. Some people are in the right place in their lives to hold space for someone who's working through deep attachment wounds. Some people have the security and the patience and the clarity to navigate this with grace. And some people don't. And both of those things are completely okay. What's not okay is spending years in confusion and pain waiting for someone to change who hasn't yet decided to do the work. Because an avoidant can change. Attachment styles are not destiny. The research on this is actually quite hopeful. People do develop more secure attachment over time, especially with the right therapeutic support and the right relationship experiences. But they have to want to change. They have to be aware enough to see the pattern. They have to do the actual work, and you can't do that work for them. This is maybe the hardest thing for people who care deeply about an avoidant. You can see the potential so clearly. You can see the person underneath the walls. You can feel how close you've been to the real connection. And it's agonizing to understand that all of that potential only materializes if they choose to pursue it. You can't love someone into security. You can't be patient enough or understanding enough to heal their attachment wounds. That's their work. And your job is to be honest with yourself about what you can live with while they either do that work or don't. Let's talk about what it's like to actually be in a relationship with an avoidant who likes you. Because the emotional experience of being on that side of this dynamic is something that deserves real acknowledgement. It is genuinely exhausting. It is confusing in a way that makes you question your own perceptions. It creates this constant low-level anxiety because you never quite know where you stand. The warmth is real, but it comes and goes in ways that feel unpredictable. The connection is real, but it has these invisible limits that you keep bumping into. And one of the most insidious things that happens when you're close to an avoidant is that you start to adapt. You start to make yourself smaller. You stop expressing certain needs because you've learned that expressing those needs triggers their withdrawal. You become hyper-aware of their emotional state because you've learned to read the signs of when they're about to pull back. You manage your own needs around their comfort level in ways that over time leave you feeling really unseen, really unmet, really alone inside what is technically a relationship. This is not because you're weak or codependent. This is because you're a human being trying to adapt to an environment in order to preserve a connection that feels important to you. That's actually a very normal human response to an inconsistent attachment figure. But it's worth naming. It's worth seeing clearly, because the adaptation itself is data. If you find yourself constantly shrinking to make someone comfortable, that's information about the relationship's dynamic that you need to take seriously. Now let's talk about something that often gets avoided in conversations like this, and that is your own attachment style. Because the way you're experiencing this avoidant person is being filtered through your own attachment history. If you have anxious attachment, the avoidance inconsistency will likely activate your abandonment fears in a really intense way. The hot and cold will feel unbearable. Every retreat will feel like confirmation of your worst fears about yourself, that you're too much or not enough or fundamentally unlovable. And the moments of warmth will feel disproportionately precious because they're intermittent. There's actually a neurochemical basis for this. Research suggests that intermittent reinforcement, which is what the push-pull dynamic creates, activates the reward system in the brain in a particularly potent way. The dopamine hit from the warm moment feels more intense, specifically because it follows a period of distance and uncertainty. This can create something that feels uncomfortably like an addiction to the dynamic itself, where you need the validation precisely because it's so intermittent, where you become attached not just to the person but to the cycle of pursuit and reward. If you're recognizing yourself in this, please don't judge yourself. This is a very human response to a very specific kind of relational pattern, but recognizing it is important, because if the pull you feel toward this person is partly about the intermittent reinforcement itself, that's something you want to understand clearly before you invest more of yourself in the situation. If you have secure attachment, the experience of being with an avoidant is different, but still challenging. You might feel more grounded in yourself, less likely to spiral into self-doubt. but you'll likely feel confused and frustrated by the inconsistency. And over time, you'll need to honestly assess whether the relationship is giving you what a secure person genuinely needs, which is consistent, mutual, emotionally available connection. Let's also talk about what happens when an avoidant is starting to genuinely trust you, because there are signs, and they're subtle, and if you miss them, you might not appreciate how significant they are. When an avoidant who likes you is starting to trust you, they'll start to share small vulnerabilities. Nothing dramatic, but little windows. A mention of a hard childhood thing. A quiet admission that they're not great at being close to people. A moment where they let you see something that isn't polished. These small disclosures are actually huge. They represent moments where the wall came down a little, where they chose the risk of being seen over the safety of hiding. Another sign that trust is building is that the cycles start to shorten. The retreats happen, but they don't last as long. They come back faster. They reach out after the distance in ways they might not have before. This is actually progress, even though it still doesn't look like what connection looks like in a healthy, securely attached relationship. You have to recalibrate your expectations to see the movement for what it is. They'll also start to let you into more areas of their life, not just the social surface areas, but the parts they keep private, their relationship with their family, their real opinions about things that matter to them, their fears and insecurities, even if they're not stating them directly. They'll start to show you those things sideways, and if you're paying attention, if you know how to read avoidant, you'll see them. Another important sign is that they start to make the relationship slightly more real in the world. They introduce you to people who matter to them. They bring you into contexts that used to be off limits. They acknowledge you in ways that create social reality around the relationship. These things feel like nothing if you're comparing them to what a secure partner does. But for an avoidant, they're enormous. Now let's talk about something really important. The role of the nervous system in all of this, because I don't want this to stay abstract. I want you to understand at a biological level what's happening for the avoidant when they like you and why their behavior is so often contrary to what their feelings would logically suggest. When an avoidant gets close to someone, when the intimacy reaches a certain depth, their nervous system goes into something like a threat response, not a conscious decision, an automatic physiological response. The same system that activates when we face physical danger activates when they face emotional vulnerability. Their heart rate changes, their cortisol rises. They get this pull to exit, to create space, to do something to reduce the intensity of what they're feeling. This is why telling an avoidant to just open up, or to just trust you, or to just stop pulling away doesn't work. It's not a matter of deciding to do it differently. The decision would have to override a deeply conditioned physiological response. It's more like telling someone with a phobia to just decide not to be scared. The fear isn't chosen, it's programmed. And changing programmed responses takes real work over real time with real support, usually in therapy, often through years of doing things differently and having enough positive experiences to gradually retrain the nervous system. This is also why avoidants often do better in relationships that don't start with a ton of intensity. Slow builds are actually more comfortable for them because they don't trigger the fear response as dramatically. The slow accumulation of positive experiences, without the overwhelming rush of early-stage enmeshment, gives their nervous system time to adjust, to learn that this person is safe, to gradually update the old story that intimacy equals danger. If you're building something with an avoidant, one of the most counterintuitive things that can actually help is giving them room to come toward you rather than always moving toward them. Not playing games, not creating false distance to manipulate them, but genuinely having your own life, your own interests, your own emotional world that doesn't orbit entirely around the relationship. This reduces the pressure they feel. It gives them space to miss you. It gives them the experience of wanting to reach out rather than always feeling pursued. And that experience of free choice, of moving toward connection because they want to rather than because they're cornered into it, is actually one of the things that can gradually shift the pattern. Let's also talk about what avoidants feel internally when they like someone, because I think there's a tendency to see them as emotionally flat, as not really feeling that much because that's what the outside looks like. But the research on avoidant attachment is actually very interesting here. Avoidants often feel just as much as anxious or secure types internally. They've just become highly skilled at suppressing the outward expression of those feelings. They've learned to present as not needing, as not feeling, as fine. But underneath that presentation, especially when they like someone, there's often a lot going on. They think about you more than you know. They analyze the connection. They feel the pull towards you. They feel the vulnerability of caring. And they sit with that vulnerability in private in ways they would never show you. There's often a lot of internal conflict between the part that wants connection and the part that's terrified of it. And that conflict is exhausting. For them, not just for you. One of the things that can help both people in this dynamic is understanding that the avoidant isn't at peace. They're not blissfully unbothered by the relationship while you're the one suffering. They're dealing with their own kind of suffering. It just looks very different from yours. Their suffering is internal and private and expressed as distance. Your suffering is more visible. But both people are in the grip of something difficult here. Let's talk about some of the specific situations that bring out the avoidant behavior most strongly. Because it's not just generalized all the time. There are particular triggers that ramp things up. Milestones are a big one. The first time someone says, "I love you," the conversation about exclusivity, meeting family, moving in together, any moment that marks a significant deepening of the commitment. These are moments of maximum threat to the avoidant sense of safety. You might notice that right before or right after one of these milestones, the avoidant behavior intensifies. More distance, more coldness, more ambiguity. This is because the milestone represents a real increase in the stakes, and the avoidance system reads that as dangerous. Emotional crises are another trigger, yours or theirs. When you're going through something hard and you need emotional support, this creates a kind of pressure that an avoidant finds very difficult. Not because they don't care, often because they care too much and don't know what to do with that caring. They might become awkward or distant precisely when you most need them to show up. They might offer practical help and completely miss the emotional need. This isn't indifference. It's a genuine deficit in how to be emotionally present with someone they care about, born from a lifetime of learning that emotional presence wasn't safe. When they themselves are going through something hard, the avoidant will almost certainly pull away from you. Going through difficulty makes them feel vulnerable, and feeling vulnerable while close to someone they care about is doubly threatening. So they might become very private and shut down right when a loving partner would naturally want to lean in and support them. And if you push through their walls when they're like this, you'll likely get shut out even harder. The thing that actually helps is being present without pressing, available without demanding, showing that you're there without creating pressure to be received in a certain way. Another big trigger is jealousy or fear of loss. Now, this one is interesting because you might expect that fear of losing you would make an avoidant more open and available. But often counterintuitively, it makes them more avoidant. When they sense that they might lose the connection, it activates both the fear of loss and the fear of intimacy simultaneously. And the fear of intimacy is louder. So instead of moving toward you to protect the relationship, they move away. It looks like they don't care. It can look like they're almost indifferent to the possibility of losing you. But underneath that surface is often a real intense fear that's been so well trained to suppress itself that it can't come out in useful ways. This is one of the reasons that the advice to make an avoidant jealous is often counterproductive. In a securely attached person, some jealousy might activate their attachment system in a way that makes them reach out and claim the relationship. In an avoidant, it's more likely to activate their withdrawal response, to make them decide that this is too much emotional exposure, too much risk, to make them pull back even further. Let me talk now about what real growth looks like in an avoidant who's working on themselves. Because this matters. Because people do change. And if you care about someone with this attachment style, it's worth knowing what actual progress looks like. So you're not fooled by performance and you're not dismissing real movement when it happens. Real growth in an avoidant looks like them being able to name what they're feeling in the moment. Not just intellectually knowing they pull away when scared, but actually saying, I notice I'm wanting to pull back right now, and I think it's because this is getting real, and I'm scared. That kind of real-time emotional naming is enormously hard for an avoidant. It requires both emotional awareness and the courage to be vulnerable about that awareness. When you see this, it's significant. Real growth looks like shorter recovery times after ruptures. They still might pull back after a deep moment, but they come back sooner. They initiate repair more readily. They don't let things fester for as long. Real growth looks like them tolerating slightly more intimacy over time without triggering the retreat. The ceiling rises. What used to be too much gradually becomes okay. You can get a little closer before the door closes. And over time, with enough safety and enough consistent positive experience, that ceiling can move quite a bit. Real growth looks like them being able to acknowledge your emotional needs as legitimate without immediately becoming defensive or shutting down. It looks like them staying in difficult conversations longer than they used to. It looks like them making explicit commitments and actually following through rather than always keeping things vague. Real growth does not look like them suddenly becoming someone different. It doesn't look like the walls disappearing overnight. It doesn't look like them becoming emotionally expressive in a way that feels effortless. Growth is slow. It's incremental. It's often uneven, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But the direction of movement matters. And if you're with someone who is genuinely moving in that direction, that's worth acknowledging, however. And this is important. You need to be honest with yourself about whether movement is actually happening or whether you're interpreting their normal behavior as progress because you want so badly to see it. This is one of the places where having your own therapeutic support, your own clarity, your own outside perspective is genuinely valuable. Because when you're in the middle of the dynamic, it's very easy to see what you want to see, to give credit for things that aren't actually movement, to forgive the same patterns over and over while calling it patience. Let's talk about a few more of the specific things avoidants do when they like you that are easy to miss because they look nothing like conventional expressions of feeling. They'll prioritize your practical well-being. If you mention your car is making a weird noise, they'll remember it and ask about it a week later. If you're sick, they'll show up with something to help, not necessarily with the warmth and physical presence you might want, but with the practical thing. If you have a big presentation, they'll ask how it went. They track the details of your life because those details matter to them. And tracking someone's life is a form of caring that doesn't require emotional exposure. They'll be protective without being possessive. An avoidant who likes you will get uncomfortable if they perceive someone treating you badly. They'll say something, or they'll create distance from that person, or they'll make it clear in their way that they're on your side. This protectiveness comes from feeling, not from possession. It's not about ownership. It's about genuine care that has nowhere else to go. They'll laugh with you in a specific way. Humor is often one of the safest forms of connection for an avoidant because it creates warmth and closeness without requiring explicit vulnerability. When an avoidant likes you, there's often a particular quality to the humor between you, a specific frequency that feels like its own language. Inside jokes accumulate. The laughter is real and warm, and it's one of the ways they let themselves feel close to you without having to name the feeling. They'll share their interests with you deeply, not just mentioning that they like a band, but wanting you to really get why the band matters, curating the experience for you, making a playlist or recommating the specific album, or wanting to be there when you first listen. This sharing of interior world through art and music and ideas is one of the primary ways avoidants communicate feeling. The things they share with you are proxies for things they can't say directly. They'll get uncomfortable when other people get close to you in a way that suggests investment. Not outwardly dramatic, often very contained. But you'll notice a shift, a quietness, a slight withdrawal that isn't quite indifference. This is their attachment system responding to perceived threat. And the fact that they have an attachment response at all is evidence of feeling. Now, I want to talk about the experience of loving an avoidant from a broader perspective. Because zoom out far enough and what you're looking at is two people, both with histories, both with wounds, both trying to figure out how to be close to another human being in a world that didn't always teach that it was safe to do so. The avoidant is not your adversary. They're not doing this to you. They're doing this because of something that happened to them long before you existed in their life. And understanding that doesn't make it less painful. It doesn't mean you have to stay. It doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your own needs on the altar of their healing. But it does mean you can respond to them with clarity rather than just hurt and confusion. You can stop taking their behavior personally, not because it's not affecting you personally, but because you understand that its origins aren't about you. It's about a much older story. And from that place of clarity, you have real choices. Real, informed choices that aren't driven by anxiety or fantasy or the intermittent reinforcement cycle. You can choose to stay and hold space and see if growth is happening. You can choose to set a clear boundary about what you need and see if they can meet it. You can choose to leave without hating them for something that isn't their fault at the most fundamental level. All of those are valid. All of those are things a clear-eyed, self-respecting person could choose. What isn't a choice that serves you is staying while continuously suppressing your needs. Waiting indefinitely without any evidence of movement. Making yourself smaller and smaller until you've disappeared inside the relationship. Interpreting their limited availability as a reflection of your worth. That path doesn't lead anywhere good for you. And honestly, it doesn't help the avoidant either. Because a relationship that never creates any pressure to grow doesn't give the avoidant any reason to do the work. The most loving thing you can do for both of you is to be honest. To communicate your needs clearly even when that communication is uncomfortable. To hold your own sense of worth even when their behavior makes it hard. To be genuinely present without losing yourself. To set real limits about what you can and cannot live with. And to be honest with yourself about what's actually happening versus what you hope is happening. Because here's the final thing I want to say about avoidants who like you. The feeling is real. Their capacity to feel is fully intact. The walls aren't evidence of not caring. They're evidence of having cared in the past and having been hurt in ways that shaped how they learned to protect themselves. What's underneath those walls is a person who wants connection just like every other human being, who wants to be known and loved and safe with someone, who is fighting against their own nervous system just to let you as close as they've already let you. That doesn't make them easy to love. It doesn't mean the relationship will be easy. But it does mean that when an avoidant chooses you, when they let you closer than most people get, when they do the sideways vulnerable things that are their version of saying you matter to me, those things are real. Those things are earned, and they mean something. The question is always whether what they can currently offer is enough for what you currently need. And that's a question that deserves your honest, clear-eyed answer, not the answer fear gives you, not the answer longing gives you. The answer that comes from knowing yourself, knowing what a healthy relationship feels like, and being willing to hold out for the real thing. Whether that's with this person as they grow, or with someone else who's already done enough of the work to meet you where you are.